This week our focus is going to be a little bit beyond India. We're going to talk about impact of the turmoil and the political changes in Pakistan and what it means for our country. I'm Pallavi Ghosh, and this week I'm asking this question: will a NAYA Pakistan, which is being promised by the new party in power over there, is actually going to have an impact and mean good news for our country? You know, when Imran Khan first came to power in Pakistan, there was a lot of hope. He was an excellent cricketer, a sportsman, someone who had a charisma and a lot of popularity. He had a lot of fans over here in India also as far as the sporting arena goes. In fact, he had a lot of friends as far as Indian politicians go, and who can forget those famous pictures of Navjot Singh Sidhu. But as Sidhu himself would point out, it was a cricketing bond between the two of them which explains the bonhomie between Imran Khan and Navjot Singh Sidhu. At one point of time, it was felt that it is these cricketing bonds of India with Pakistan which could be used for the benefit of an improvement in the diplomatic relations with Pakistan. That didn't happen because someone who was nurtured and picked up and backed from the army could not speak a language which was not hawkish, which is why soon Imran Khan antagonized many over here when he started attacking the Prime Minister, at times personally, when he also raised questions over what he called the RSS and the BJP nexus, and he in fact accused the Indian government of being against the Muslim minority. And Imran Khan would often say that the Muslims who are a minority in our country are just not safe here. Of course, Kashmir was an issue which he kept on picking up. At the height of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, he actually decided to go to Moscow, which did not endear him to many of the world's leaders, certainly not to America and certainly not to India, which has tried to follow a tightrope balancing act between Russia and Ukraine as far as those developments are taking place. So India started watching the political developments in Pakistan very, very closely. See, we don't live in an insulated world anymore. We live in a kind of a global village or global world, where what happens in one country has a deep political, diplomatic and economic fallout. So what is happening, for example, in Ukraine does have an impact on India, not just because there are many Indians who are working there or studying there, but also it's a question of oil, for example, which is why India is now looking at Russia for discounted oil and so on and so forth. But more importantly, what happens in the immediate neighborhood has a deep impact on our geopolitics. So, for example, an instability in a Bangladesh, in Nepal, but more importantly in Pakistan, certainly has an impact on our country. The economic crisis in Sri Lanka certainly has a reason to got many of our people to be worried, because there are those deep connects. Now, with Pakistan, India has a rich cultural backdrop. You know, many of our people over here live in and have settled down in Pakistan. Many Indians do have relatives who have settled down in Pakistan. So the antagonism which we often see between the two governments actually does not get percolated down at the level of, say, interpersonal relations. There's a cultural similarity in terms of language, in terms of the food we eat, in kind of clothes. Pakistani movies and serials are very popular in India, just as many of the Indian movies are very popular over there. Our film stars, our way of clothing, our food over there as well. So when Imran Khan disappointed us, India started looking at the political developments which are taking place, and it was just a matter of time that Imran Khan would go. Now, Imran Khan did the unthinkable, which is taking on the army. He also took on America. In fact, he accused an international conspiracy which he said was hatched in the West, which means he has not endeared himself either to the army or to America. So his successor needs to do and deal with that healing touch. But it's so ironical for a man who was very critical of India, especially in the international platform, and would not miss any opportunity to raise the Kashmir issue, while going actually praised us. He called us Khuddar, and the reason is that we may have a deep connect with Imran Khan. He may be quite popular with many of the Indians over here, but on one particular issue, India refused to compromise, and that is Kashmir was an internal matter. It cannot be raised on any international platform, and Pakistan certainly cannot meddle in the internal affairs of Kashmir. So whenever there were little problems taking place in Kashmir, when the government was looking at delimitation, any statement from Imran Khan was completely unacceptable by the Indian government. Which is why this regime change, this whole talk of real or asli Pakistan is being looked by us very, very interestingly. Let's talk about the Sharifs a bit, because the coalition government over there, of course, comprises on many stakeholders, and the Sharifs are one of them. Now, Shehbaz Sharif has always been a more low-profile, reticent, younger brother of Nawaz Sharif, been a chief minister of Punjab, one of the most powerful provinces of Pakistan, and certainly has a deep equation with our Punjab over here. In fact, when the Badals were in charge in the state, he had visited Punjab, he had spoken about need to improve trade ties, more commerce between the two Punjabs and the two countries as well. Not just now, but even earlier when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, he had also come here and he had said very publicly that diplomatic ties need to be improved, but the basis of it will have to be the trade ties. When commerce improves, when economics between the two countries improves, by naturally the political and diplomatic ties between the two countries would improve as well. And this was good news for our country, because that's what India has been stressing on. Please keep the Kashmir issue out. Forget the acrimony, because at the end of the day, we are one world. India does want to have a communication going or dialogue with Pakistan, but on our terms. We are not going to allow Kashmir to be discussed. Pakistan would also have to acknowledge the fact that their soil was often used by terrorists to hit out against our country. Now, what happens is that when there's political instability, and that's what India is looking at very closely at the new government, is if there's political instability in Pakistan, then what happens is the army, for example, gets emboldened, because the army by its nature is very used to war. In Pakistan, certainly raising up the Kashmir issue, keeping a conflict zone going, suits the army over there in Pakistan, and India certainly wouldn't want that political instability to take place. Second, to secure itself in a mahal of political instability, politicians in Pakistan keep on raising the issue of Kashmir, and they stoke the acts of terror because it suits them, because they feel that's what's going to give them acceptability as far as the people of Pakistan are concerned. And therefore, for India, it matters that the Sharifs are Sharif, that the Sharifs remain in control and the coalition government remains in power, and they are able to provide a semblance of political stability. But, if you just look at the backdrop of the Sharifs, they have certainly had better equations with India, more level of understanding, and they have not always focused on, this concept of having war or being at war with India. Improvement of ties, diplomatic relations to be improved. Let's talk about trade and commerce. These were the important factors which Nawaz Sharif and even Shehbaz Sharif have often spoken about. And therefore, India is a little bit more positive about this outcome as far as the new regime change in Pakistan is concerned. As I said, we are living in a global situation. What happens in a neighborhood does have an impact on us. For example, India's dependence on Pakistan is minimal, but Pakistan depends on India for many of the commodities. Sugar, for example, is one of the biggest exports from India to Pakistan. We would want our trade ties going. See, in the post-COVID world, the economy we know has taken a backseat for most of the countries in the world, but in India's growth story is showing a certain amount of green shooting. We want to become Atmanirbhar, which means we want to increase our exports, but we want our imports to come down. And therefore, we would want our export rates to go up increasingly. And while we're not so much dependent on Pakistan in terms of our export figures or ratings, we certainly would want that export figures to rise up. But if there are bad ties between India and Pakistan, and Shehbaz Sharif understands that. He understands that you cannot antagonize India and expect that trade would be smooth, because Pakistan depends, because of the geography and because of the similar cultural and political ties, a lot on Indian products and commodities, and depends a lot on imports coming in from India. And therefore, Shehbaz Sharif, who is going to face the biggest challenge, because he has to ensure economic stability, economic growth, political stability, because remember, elections are not too far away in Pakistan, and Imran Khan is not one to give up. His language is such where he is hoping that he can act as a martyr by raising this whole concept of, he was pulled down, he was booted out because he was taking on the corrupt netas. He actually criticized America because he wants to talk about a Pakistan which was dictated from outside. And therefore, the task is cut out for the new government in Pakistan. They have to show that they are in command, they need to come back to power. They can only do so in the short timeline to ensure quick economic stability, political stability. So these are the factors. But before I let go, there's another important factor, and it's an interesting one, is the role which has been played by BILAWAL Bhutto. He's been one person who has not been so much in the limelight, but someone who became the head of the party once his mother died in an unfortunate assassination. In fact, his father, Zardari, would say that I am in active politics only because I'm keeping the seat warm for my son. I'm waiting for him to grow up. I'm waiting for him to take charge. So in that sense, Bilawal Bhutto, many say in Pakistan, is the face of the future. Some in private also criticize him for being, say, what is called the Rahul Gandhi of Pakistan. But you know what is again similar to, say, a Bilawal Bhutto and the Gandhis over here is the entire dynasty tag. Just as Rahul Gandhi is often derided and called a Shehzada, similar is the kind of tag which is attached to Bilawal Bhutto. This could be his moment of awakening. This could be his moment of growing up. Can he aid the new government in Pakistan to bring about a semblance of political stability and economic growth? And if this government comes back to power whenever those elections are held in Pakistan, it's going to be an interesting take to watch out for. Also remember, Bilawal Bhutto is young, he has new ideas, and in that sense he has a connect with a lot of young Indians because they've all studied in Oxford, they've been to Britain, and therefore that could be an interesting perspective to look out for. So this week, as I start wrapping up, do give us your reactions. Will a new Pakistan also mean new improved ties between India and Pakistan? Will the emergence of Bilawal Bhutto also mean the emergence of a new, younger Gen X in Pakistan? And what does it mean for a younger, growing India? Do give me your reactions on our social media timeline. Thank you so much for watching.